Hillel Fuld, so great to have you on See One Beautiful Soul. So welcome. Hello.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for having me. And I could tell you right now, your energy, give me some of that.
Oh, you have it. I feel like you have it even more than I do. All your pictures and, I know your family a little bit because I know my friend Joe for 20 years. And I know Joe's mom, Hannah, is like the biggest Sudeikis. And so if your family married into that family, and I met your parents. I know your parents. So I get that you guys have a lot of amazing energy, very strong family. So why don't you take us back a little bit? I'm always like amazed at why people move to different countries. And I know that your like whole family made Aliyah, right? You all left
Yes.
New York and the New York area, and you went to Israel. And for most people growing up in America, it's like, we'll go visit. Maybe we'll even have a summer home there. But like, what instilled that in you guys?
Okay, so I guess we'll start from sixth grade. I'm in sixth grade, and my dad is the principal of my school in SAR in the Bronx. And
I work there.
Get out of here! Wow, I love that. So
I taught theater and music and mindfulness there for like 2 years.
Wow,
Amazing.
that's awesome.
Yeah, I only left because of the pandemic, but anyway, we'll talk about that later.
I think it's safe to say SAR is about the only elementary school that kids are actually excited to go to. Best years of my life. Anyway, so my dad was given a sabbatical. My dad was the principal. He was given a sabbatical year in Israel. And so we picked up and came to Israel when I was in sixth grade. And, I picked up the language. It took me a little bit, but I picked up the language. And like a few months into that year, my parents came to like a parents teachers meeting. And my teacher said to my parents, like, he sits there and he doesn't disturb, but he doesn't really participate. My parents are like, he's been in Israel for like 2 months, right? They're like, what? We didn't even know he was an Israeli. So I picked up the language pretty quickly. And then I went back to America. And I didn't, when you're a kid, you pick up languages. So I didn't really forget the Hebrew. And then the deal was that my dad has to be principal for at least 3 years after the sabbatical. And on the day we were on a plane, 3 years later, we're on the plane. And, today Zionism is like a dirty word, but, I was brought up in a very Zionistic home. It was always kind of very clear to my family that America is just like a temporary stop on the way home. Obviously, my grandparents from Germany and from Hungary, it's a whole thing. But the bottom line is I came here when I was in 10th grade. So ninth grade, I was in New York, and then 10th grade in Jerusalem, which is, as you can imagine, not such an ideal age for such a transition. And, I'm not going to lie, a couple of years in, I was pretty bitter in the beginning. But now the punchline, 28 years later, it's the best thing that ever happened to me, both personally and professionally. Personally, I live in Beit Shemesh, town in between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and 5 kids, wonderful family, wonderful life, loving my career, living it up, assuming we're somewhere around the same, age. I'm 43. So yeah. when we were growing up, to move to Israel meant you had to lower your quality of life. Today, it is completely not true. You can come here and you can increase and, have a better quality of life. It's exciting times. And that's kind of on a personal level. On the professional level, I always had a very, very deep passion for technology. I didn't really know how I was going to get into the world of tech, but I always knew that I would. And I studied political science, which obviously has nothing to do with what I do for a living. But I found myself at my first job, a technical writer. So that's the guy who write the user guides that no one ever reads. And it was, on the one hand, very, very boring. On the other hand, I learned very important lessons throughout those years. And the 2 biggest lessons that I learned are, one, that my love of technology is actually deeper than I thought, because here I am writing user guides about enterprise servers. And I should be bored out of my mind, but I'm loving it. And the second thing I learned is the skill to, let's call it, interview someone technical and simplify their, lingo or their jargon into something that a normal person can understand, which is what I then used to blog. And so that started my whole career. So yeah, that's how I got to where I am. I mean, it started there and hasn't stopped.
And this is going to come up. So I don't make small talk really. I'm Jewish with a capital J. What was the biggest forgiveness moment in your life? What was the thing you had to forgive the most? What would be the first thing that you would say?
Wow. Nobody's ever asked me that question before. I guess we're going to get heavy, from the get-go.
You had the questions. I sent you the questions.
I just want to tell you something. I just came back from a TV studio where I had to speak about Twitter and Instagram's role in the war. And they're like, prepare, like you need to speak for like 10 minutes each platform for 10 minutes. And I'm like, I can't, if I prepare, then it doesn't come off authentic. So I always wing it. I looked at your questions, but whatever. Anyway.
That's why you're wearing the Twitter bird on your shirt.
There you go. So, okay. So this is going to be a little bit heavy, but I guess let's just jump in. What you're referring to before is that my older brother, Ari, was tragically murdered in a terrorist attack about 4 years ago. And that a lot of people talk about terrorist victims, but they don't really speak a lot about the family, and the effects on a family are pretty bad. As you mentioned, I have a very strong family, and that's still true till today. But I don't want to sound too dramatic, but things never go back to the way they were. But as far as forgiveness is concerned, I don't even know if I don't think I've ever spoken about this publicly, but Ari bullied me pretty badly as a kid. We never really confronted it. We worked in parallel professions. We both used social media. He used it for Israel advocacy, and I used it for technology, but we both worked on social media. And so we had a lot of overlap, and a lot of times he would ask me for favors, whether it was because our enemies decided to attack him on Facebook and get his account banned. So he would then ask me to, use my connections on Facebook to get his account reinstated. And so, over the years, he asked me for a lot of favors, and obviously I was always happy to help. But deep down inside, I think I was always a little bit resentful about, him bullying me as a kid. We never really confronted it. And I think subconsciously believed that all right, we'll talk about it one day or not. Obviously that day never came, and it's hard, on the one hand, listen, obviously it doesn't even, you can't even, I'm not putting it on the same level as the mourning and the sadness. But yeah, I do kind of wish somewhere that I would have spoken to him about it. But you gotta forgive, and you gotta move on and learn from a great man. He was a great man. So I guess that's my biggest forgiveness ever.
Wow. I'm already crying.
You didn't expect that, right?
Not at all. And what I love about the answer is that it's so real and it's so raw. And it's almost like you're saying you wish you had forgiven yourself, because I had the honor of meeting your brother the summer before it happened. I didn't think I was going to start crying this quickly, but it's just so surreal to see you. And we, on Tisha B'Av, the week of Tisha B'Av, you could, which is my birthday, by the way. I'm Rosh Chodesh Av, baby. I'm really into Hebrew birthdays, by the way. If you don't know yours, listeners, look it up. It's amazing. Everyone has one. And so I was born Rosh Chodesh Av. And so ultimately, I'm born on the only yahrzeit mentioned in the Torah, Aaron Kohen. I happen to be a Bas Kohen. I'm really into Rodef Shalom, making peace. Hate that we're all divided, which is why I started this podcast. Rabbi Aaron, basically dared me to make a podcast about relationships, and forgiveness is the big F word. But the point is that, that week of Tisha B'Av, Hannah invited me to go to your brother's for a meat meal, because you could eat meat if you study the Torah. You have so he had just learned, I think, with your father, like a Masechet or something from the Talmud, and had everybody over for a big meal. And so that's how I met him. I met him at his house, and I was so moved. And of course I had heard about him and seen his videos, very outspoken about Israel and, our enemies, so to speak, and what we need to do. And it would rattle me sometimes, because I was like, oh my gosh, I hope he's okay. I hope no one's after him. And, to hear just a year later that this happened. And for the listeners who don't know what happened, do you want to just explain a little bit how it happened?
Sure. But before I do that, I actually want to tell you a story that, again, I don't think I've ever spoken about publicly, but it was very relevant to what you just said.
I'm so honored. I love this non-publicly stuff. This is great.
Yeah. So, he worked in Israel advocacy, which obviously is not a very lucrative business from a monetary economic perspective. And so I approached him one day. I said, Ari, you have a lot of talents. Let's get you into tech. You can make real money. And he was like, all right, let's talk about it. So long story short, I spoke to a friend of mine who's the CEO of a company, and they hired him. And, he was working there. And then, like you mentioned, he had one of these siyums in his house where he finished a tractate of Talmud. And the blessing, or the prayer that we say when we finish a tractate of Talmud, the word is I'm just loosely translating. We get up in the morning and they get up in the morning. We get up in the morning to run to the base measures to learn Torah. They run to, to nonsense, referring to, our understanding of how important Torah is and its central theme in our lives. And when he was saying those words that they run to nonsense, Miriam, his wife, told me that he started to cry because he says, what am I doing in tech? And he basically quit that job and went back to defending Israel online. So yeah, anyway, long story short is Ari was a hero on so many levels. On a physical level, he was a 4th degree black belt. He was a big dude. He volunteered in the IDF and climbed up the ranks. And he was what's called a magist, which is a guy that carries around the mag machine gun, which is a machine gun literally created to be carried by a tank, not by a human being. So he was a big dude, and his sergeant at the funeral said that he approached Ari just a couple of months before and said, Ari, you've been carrying this mag for like 20 years. It's time to give it to someone a little younger than you. And Ari wouldn't even have, he was like, what are you talking about? This is my gun. I'm not giving it to anyone. But anyway, so he came to Israel by himself before his family, and he, like I said, volunteered in the IDF, climbed up the ranks, and he made a real name for himself on the internet, defending Israel. And then he was walking one Sunday morning in his neighborhood, shopping for his family, and a 16-year-old Palestinian kid stabbed him in the neck and a main artery, which I'm not a doctor, but there's no surviving. I guess the kid got lucky because he got him this main artery, and it's basically immediate death. And he literally had no blood in his veins within an instant. And somehow, nobody knows how, he managed to run after the terrorist 50 meters, jump over a wall, and shoot the guy. He didn't kill him, but he shot him because the guy was about 2 feet away from his next victim, a woman who sells falafel in that place, who's now become part of the family. But he basically, in his last breath, literally in his last breath, saved lives. And so he got the honor from the state of Israel as a national hero, which, you just have to think about it in the historical perspective. When my grandmother was in Auschwitz, if we had told her that her grandson would be a national hero of the state of Israel, I can't even imagine what her reaction would have been. So that's what happened. I can tell you on my end, I was at work that morning. I was at a startup's office and I was reading Israeli news, just like on a news website. And there was a big play button next to a news item that said there was a terrorist attack in this place. And of course I pressed play and I watched this kid stab this guy in the back, and this Superman of a guy then runs after him and shoots him. I'm thinking to myself, who is this guy? And so I asked in the Fuld WhatsApp group, is everyone okay? Because I knew it was near Ari's house. And I got that phone call with two words that will never, ever, ever escape my brain for as long as I live. It was my older brother, Donnie, who called and said, it's him. And so I obviously quickly closed my computer, took all my stuff, ran to the hospital. And on the way, Donnie called me and said, don't rush. And so speaking of the F word, pretty sure I uttered that F word, a different F word than you mentioned in the car. It wasn't, it was unbelievable, still is unbelievable. But, as often happens after he was murdered, the stories started to pour in by the thousands. I can tell you that Benjamin Netanyahu came to the house and said, you guys have to write a book. He said, we didn't write the book about all the stories about Yoni Netanyahu who was killed. You have to write a book. We haven't done that yet, but the stories are just absolutely remarkable. I have people reaching out to me from all corners of the earth saying, your brother changed my life. And I say, oh, were you friends? And they say, no. I said, well, did you meet him? No. Did you ever speak to him? No. How did he change your life? And he did. He touched millions of lives, which is remarkable from a personal perspective. But as a person who lives on social media, it's also remarkable from a professional perspective that one single person can reach that many lives. But I do want to say one thing that I think is chills inducing. And my dad spoke about it before. I've spoken about it before, but as someone, as you said, you believe in, in Hebrew birthdays, and just from getting your vibe, I think that this is going to move you. I don't know if you heard the story, but it's mind-boggling. So when Ari was born, now it's 50 years ago, my parents named him Ari. Did you hear this? You didn't hear this. This is going to blow your mind. Like, sit down, hold on to your chair. I'm not even kidding, but this is going to blow your mind. So they named him Ari. Now, generally speaking, Ari was a shortcut of Aryeh, which means lion. Ari wasn't really a word. It wasn't really a name that was common. So many people asked my parents, like, where'd you get that? Like, what's Ari? is it a shortcut? And they're like, no, Ari is his name. And they're like, where do you like? And like, we like the name. They didn't think much of it. Anyway, fast forward, 30, 40 years, and Ari becomes who he was. And he moves to Israel by himself. And like I said, he's a real hero. He literally like old school conquers the land, like biblical stuff, right? He was a real hero. So if you look at Ari's life, he had a few characteristics that were very dominant. One of them is, first of all, like I said, he was a hero who conquered the land. The second thing is I would wake up sometimes in the middle of the night and I would see Ari debating on Facebook with some anti-Semite. And I'd say to him, Ari, what are you doing? Go to sleep. Like, are you nuts? It's 4 o'clock in the morning. And he wouldn't even he was like, what are you talking about? I gotta, this guy is spreading lies. I need to tell him the truth. And I said, but you're not going to change this person's mind. And he said, it's not about them. It's about the thousands of people watching this dialogue. They need to know the truth. But the guy did not sleep. I don't know when he slept. He was up all day, all night protecting Israel. So he did not sleep. So that's another characteristic. Another characteristic is, like I mentioned, he was a 4th degree black belt. And so when he would pray, and most of us do like a shuckling gesture or movement, he would stand in meditation, like you couldn't even move him, deep in prayer. And specifically one prayer, which is the prayer of Shema, which is one of the most important prayers in Judaism. It proclaims God's oneness. And he was just very, very passionate about Shema. I don't know why, and I don't know where he got that from, but he was. There are videos of him on Facebook with a megaphone screaming, Shema Yisrael, Shema. He was very passionate about it. And another thing that he was very passionate about, and again, don't know why, don't know where, is tzitzis, is the commandment to wear, fringes on your 4-cornered garment. He was very, very passionate about it. Okay, so those were a couple of characteristics that described Ari. After the terrorist attack, my parents opened the Torah and they said, where is this name Ari? Like, where did we get it from? What is the source for the name Ari? And I'm opening my phone now because I want to read something to you that, like I said, I mean, this will blow your mind. So there's 2 mentions in the whole Torah of the word Ari. Okay, I'm going to read you the verse, and I'm going to read you the translation, and then I'm going to read you the commentary. The verse says, Kara shachav ke'ari. They crouch, they lie down like a lion, Ari, which is a lion. Like the king of beasts, who dare rouse them? That's the verse. Okay. Now, if I would say to you, please define a lion, okay? Because the verse says Ari, a lion. So I would ask you to define it. You'd say, the most powerful animal in the animal kingdom. There are a lot of ways you would define a lion. Let me read to you what Rashi, the biggest commentator on the Torah, says. I'm reading word for word. If you don't believe me, look it up, because this is hard to believe. No, this is actually hard to believe. Karash shachav ke'ari. He crouched, he lay down as a lion. What is Ari? This is what Rashi says, word for word. Kitargumo, like the other commentary, Unkelus, who explains what a lion is. You ready? Yityashvu be'artzam bekoch u'vigvura. They will settle the land with strength and heroism. That is the definition of a lion, which is, if that was the only time, that's just unbelievable. That's how you define a lion. But wait, it gets significantly better. The second time the word Ari appears in the Torah, this is just completely wild. Hein am kilaviakum, lo, a people that rise like a lion, uche'arit nasa, leaps up like the king of beasts. You ready? Lo yishkav, he won't sleep. Ad yochal teref, the lion doesn't sleep. That is what the pasuk said. That is what the verse says. Now wait till you hear what Rashi says. Hold on to your seat. This is just, all right, you ready? Heinam kilaviakum. Kshehinomdim mishnatam shacharit. When the lion gets up in the morning, hein mitgabrim kilavi v'cha'ari lachtof et hamitzvot. They overcome themselves and their desires like a lion to grab the commandments of the Torah. And which commandments does Rashi list? You ready? Lilvosh talit, to wear tzitzis, likro et shema, ulahaniach tefillin. Those, out of all the 613 commandments that Rashi could have listed, he lists a talis, shema, and prayer. It's his autobiography. So yeah, he was a remarkable dude.
If you can get Rashi to write your autobiography like 2,000 years before you die, I mean, that's pretty awesome. Well, may his neshama have an aliyah by everyone hearing that beautiful, beautiful Torah given by his younger brother.
It's my dad, by the way. My dad said it. I just copied it from him.
You copied it pretty well. I think you made it your own. I think you stamped it. Yeah, when you light something with beautiful words of Torah, there's more and more light, and you have a lot of light, Hillel. And your name is very fitting. Learning Hillel in the Gemara, it's very, very fitting for you. You're someone out there.
I have to say something. I have to say something now because you brought it up. I mean, I wasn't going to say anything, but I got to tell you something. Recently, this happened recently. I was talking to someone. They said to me, like, what makes you feel alive? Like in your career, what do you love doing? And in my career, I built an entire career on elevating and empowering others, whether it's through interviewing them, whatever it is, empowering others. In Hebrew, we call it firgun, which in English, kind of like the loose translation is kind of giving props or giving a stage to other people, right? This is what I do my whole career. I love praising others. I enjoy it, right? So this person said to me, when you praise others, how do you feel? I said, I feel complete. I feel complete and I feel alive. And then they looked at me and they said, what's your name? And I said, Hillel Chaim Shlomo. Hillel means to praise. Chaim is life and Shlomo is shalem, feeling whole. It blew my mind. And I'm not that type of guy. Like I'm not into the superstitious stuff, but oh my God. I mean, you can't ignore that. That was just mind blowing.
Your parents obviously did many, many, many things right. The fact that your father was even a principal for a day at the school that I love teaching at the most. And it's basically camp for Jewish kids during the day. There's no walls literally in the whole school. And it's, even though it's rooted in Orthodox Judaism, it's very, very open in terms of like, there's so many contradictions with the school. It's very loud. I fit right in there. I miss it. But getting back to, you know, how you recover from something like that. I think all of our listeners who are probably riveted by everything that's happened so far, and we've totally gone out of order and whatever, but it doesn't matter. That's what I love about you. You're like all over the place in the most colorful, beautiful way.
I love how you turned that into a compliment, but okay, I'll take it.
No, it's amazing. We're very similar because we know the through line. The through line is Hashem. The through line is oneness. And the title of this podcast is See One Beautiful Soul. And I want to get back to that very first thing that you said, which is that you, when I asked you what was the biggest thing you had to forgive, you actually, you started with your issues with Ari. And I didn't expect you to say that, but I'm so glad you did, because I'm sure there's a lot of people with unfinished business in Olam Hazeh in this world. And I think that's such a heroic thing to start with. And so I don't want to let that go.
Okay.
I want to know, first of all, how you forgive Hashem, God, the oneness, the universe for allowing this to happen when it did. And I'm sure you probably don't even know all the ramifications of why it had to happen at that exact time. I'm sure you've already thought about it though, because you're such a spiritual person. But how do you, first of all, forgive that it happened? Or if you've even gotten yourself to a place where you could forgive the killer, I'd love to hear about that, because in today's day and age, we are so divided. And part of what makes us so divided is holding on to anger and resentment towards people that we all know are all just vessels of God's light. All of us,
right.
For whatever reason, we have a mission in this world. And even those disgusting, awful, evil atrocities, we have to, we may not get there, but we have to try to understand that they all have a purpose. So if you could just touch a little bit on that, and then we'll get back to the first thing you said.
So, I mean, I'm going to disagree with your premise. You're asking me how I can forgive God. I'm not sure that I have to forgive God, because if I have to forgive God for every bad thing that happens, that means I have to praise God for every good thing that happens. That means I have to get up and pronounce my gratitude to God that I opened my eyes this morning. Did I do that? No, I didn't do that. So if I'm not thanking him for every single good thing, then how could I blame him for every single bad thing? That's inconsistent and that's hypocrisy. So I don't really look at it that way. You know, the question of how could God have let the Holocaust happen? Maybe it's a lack of faith. Maybe it's my weakness. I don't know, but I don't believe God did the Holocaust. I mean, Hitler did the Holocaust. I mean, could God have stopped it? Yes. But I think God lets us human beings run the world. And so, you know, could God have stopped that 16-year-old Palestinian kid? Of course he could have, but it wasn't God who said, let's kill Ari at this moment. I mean, I know that that's a little bit of a like heretic view, but it's a very fine line and a balance between God knowing something's going to happen to God making something happen. And it's a much longer discussion, but the bottom line is I don't feel like I have to forgive God for this, because I don't understand, you know, God's ways or the reason that things happen. And so I can't even pretend to understand it. The only thing that I always tell myself, and I know this is extremely simplistic and kind of like, I don't even know, infantile, or whatever you want to call it, which is that when I bring my kid to get a shot at the doctor, he cries and thinks this doctor hates him. And we know the doctor doesn't hate him. We know the doctor is doing something for his, you know, benefit. but this kid can't understand it because his field of view is so limited that he can't fathom the concept that this guy is sticking a needle in his arm because he loves him. So that's kind of how I view the world. I mean, I can't understand it. Even trying to understand it it's ridiculous. Like I'm a little pipsqueak, a little dot in this massive universe. And who am I to try to understand God's ways? I'm nobody. So I don't feel the need to forgive God. Having said that, about the murderer, when he was on trial, they asked me if I wanted to come to the court. My other brothers did go. I could not go. I couldn't look at this guy in the face. It's not like I walk around, harboring anger, but I don't think, again, I don't feel like I have the need to forgive this guy. Like, let him, spend the rest of his life in jail. Listen, if I felt like it was eating me up inside, that I'm always angry, then obviously I would have to deal with it. But, that's not the case. As far as, me moving on with my life, I'll be honest, after the murder, as I'm sure many families of terrorist victims, I was not in a good place. And this is an unbelievable story. One of the many things that were weighing on me was how I'm going to support my family. Like, I can't get out of bed. I can't put on my socks in the morning. How am I going to support my family? We're 5 kids. Like, and it was very much weighing on me for a while. And I didn't really know how to get past that anxiety. And then about a month afterwards, a month after the murder, I got a phone call from a really good friend of mine who's a very successful entrepreneur. And he says to me, Hillel, please come to Tel Aviv to meet me. And I said to him, Kobe, like, I love you, but I'm not taking business meetings right now. He said, come to Tel Aviv. Now, this guy is like very soft-spoken, very not pushy. And I was like, this is extremely uncharacteristic of him. And I love the guy. And he's always been great to me. So I'm like, all right, fine. I get in my car, go to Tel Aviv. I meet him in a cafe in the middle of Tel Aviv. I sit down across from him. He looks in my eyes and he says to me the following sentence. He says, Hillel, me and the 300 other people you've helped over the years, we will not let you fall. The tears started to stream. I went home, and I think it is safe to say he saved my life. I'm not to say that I was, God forbid, suicidal, but I didn't know what I was going to do. And he gave me that cushion, even though it was just, listen, it's that one sentence. And I could talk about how to communicate with someone, who has lost a loved one and what to say and what not to say. I'll just say one more thing. And that is that there's an amazing book that someone dropped off at my house one Friday afternoon and said, read this book. It's called Option B by Sheryl Sandberg, which is a phenomenal book. Her husband basically dropped dead one day, and she talks about option B. You have to live life, or, option A is drowning in mourning. Option B is living life. And there's one story in that book that resonated so strongly with me. She said that people were calling her all the time saying, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And she's like, I can't, don't ask me what you can do, right? Just do. And she said someone called her once and said, what don't you want on your hamburger? Meaning, I'm getting you a hamburger. Don't make any decisions. Just tell me what you don't like. And she's like, that is what I needed. And I said to it just hit home for me because, people have good intentions, and God forbid, I don't want to throw anyone to the bus, but like, people are asking me, what can I do? And I'm like, I can't tell you what to do. If you want to do something, just do it. Don't ask me, because I can't decide anything right now. So, the bottom line is, obviously, time, quote unquote, heals. It doesn't heal, but it, I guess, gives you a little comfort. I went right back to work within a couple of months because I wanted to distract myself, which is extremely unhealthy. And the government pays for our therapy. I didn't take that offer, unfortunately. And I said to myself, I'll always be distracted. So I'll work. Work makes me happy, and I just won't think about it. And that's it. Little did I know that a pandemic was coming, in which I'd have to sit at home and sit with my thoughts. So like many millions of people in the beginning of COVID, I had to deal with a lot of, depression. It was just full-blown depression. And I learned about the mental health space, and that's a whole discussion in and of itself. But, you gotta do what you gotta do. You gotta live life.
Okay. So very quickly, I don't necessarily think because you forgive someone doesn't mean that they don't need to spend their whole life in jail. I think the punishment could never fit the crime. What this gentleman chose to do with a knife so quickly and just eradicate a force that was so big in this world. I think Ari's spirit will always live on through all the thousands and thousands and thousands of people, maybe even millions of people that he touched through his life and through his death. And we don't know. It's none of our business. Like, how it affects it and why it had happened at that time. But I'm just picking that bone with you, and you're welcome to say Barb, but it's none of your business.
No, of course I agree with you.
First guest that I had on the podcast, just so you know, and I'm going to send you the episode if you haven't heard it yet, is Azim Kamisa, whose son was tragically murdered with one bullet one time by a gang member who was trying to get into a gang and was dared by an 18-year-old. He was 14, the killer, to kill someone to prove that he wanted the belonging of being in the gang. And
Horrible.
The reason I had him on first is because one of my friends who works in Jewish education through music, Craig, was like, you got to have him on. He's got to be your first guest. And I'm so grateful that he said yes. He's like super famous. And what does he do? He decided a year after his son was murdered that he was going to purposely forgive this guy, got him a lower jail sentence. I mean, he's on a level that I can't even, but I'm sharing the story because for our listeners who've heard the story, it's actually unbelievable what he decided to do with this moment in time. But he went to the trial and he forgave the guy publicly, and the guy got a lot less time in jail. And when he came out, now he speaks all over the world about the tragedy of youth violence, and he prevents terrible things from happening every single day. Now, why am I sharing that with you? Because I think when I said to you, how do you forgive God? Because to me, it's like, everything you said, I agree with 100%, that it's not even up to us to forgive God. First, does God need our forgiveness? No, he's way powerful than all she is way powerful than all of us, but we can't understand God's ways. But for me, it's like, how do you forgive it that it happened in the first place? Number one. Number two, how do you forgive the murderer? I'm not saying that we should like go to his house, sing Kumbaya, and like do what Azim did. That's like a level I can't even touch. But when I say the bedtime Shema every night, which is like my favorite prayer, it's the best sleep medicine in the world. When I actually say the words, even if I don't feel them, because why do you think I started this podcast? I have trouble forgiving also. I came from a house of domestic violence and things that I had to forgive for years, and anxieties, and that line that says, I hereby forgive anyone that damaged me, my family, people that I love, through my property, through all those things. And we have to go through that list. It's hard for me to say it, but just by saying the words and trying, I believe something happens in the world where we can actually start to become the better versions of ourselves as humanity, right?
Right.
So I'm not asking you to forgive it.
I mean, what you're saying is obviously, I mean, any psychologist, any therapist would say that that's the healthy way of looking at things. Again, maybe it's my weakness, but I'm not even like at that place in my life that I could even think of the word forgiveness and that guy in the same sentence, but maybe one day, who knows?
Right. And you know what? It's not even important. I was just curious how you personally get up every day when all of this has happened. And you answered it so beautifully. I'm beyond amazed and moved by you. And the purpose of this podcast is actually not to like everybody forgive everybody and it's done. It's more like a group therapy session for all of us, as every single person on the planet is dealing with multiple forgiveness stories at a time. You wouldn't be human if you weren't. But I think that is, that's the rub. That's part of our job as human beings, as we get through things. Tell us one thing that you wish every single human in the world knew, how to live a life of more freedom. What's one tip you have?
I think this concept of a bucket list is something that in like Western society, we kind of like glorify. Oh, what's on your bucket list? I'm like fundamentally opposed to the concept of a bucket list. I don't understand why in 2022, if something's on your list, why would you not do it? Like, why leave something on the list? If my career can teach anyone anything, it's that there is literally nothing, but I mean nothing, that's impossible today. I mean, given the tools and resources we have at our disposal, I mean, we grew up on Alyssa Milano. Remember Who's the Boss? I'm sure you had a crush on Alyssa Milano just like I did. We all had crushes on Alyssa Milano. And now, as funny as these words that I'm about to say are, I'm friends with Alyssa Milano. Like, yeah, like she follows me on Twitter. We talk, like we're like, no, but I'm saying, on what planet, in what universe is that possible? Ellen DeGeneres follows me on Twitter. Like, it's crazy. And so,
oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah. So I'm saying my career is, by all definitions of the word, by all standards, impossible to have happened. And yet it happened. Here I am, some guy who just loved tech. I'm not an engineer. I didn't build any billion-dollar companies, just a guy who loved tech and went all in on his passion. And here I am working with Google and working with Microsoft. And it's crazy. None of it makes any sense, but it happened. And the reason it happened, The only reason that it happened is because I ignored all the people that told me it's impossible. And I went in on my passion and I ignored everyone. So if I want to leave a message to people, I was like, just if you have something on your list, just do it. Don't leave it on your list. What are you waiting for? That's my message.
And the last question I have is, how do you deal with your own failures?
Oh
The
gosh.
3F. Forgiveness, freedom, and failure. I know I'm asking the hard-hitting questions.
So this is a rough one for me. I gotta be honest with you. It's a problem. I mean, first of all, you said in the beginning that, like, my pictures on the internet, like, I think by now we all know that what's portrayed on the internet is not necessarily always accurate and always true. And so, yes, I portray this like perfect, happy, blah, blah, blah. And obviously I'm struggling a lot internally, like everyone is. And I've learned about myself over the past couple of years, for better or for worse. I'm a people pleaser. I like when people like me. I mean, I guess we all like when people like them, but I guess there's different levels. And for me, it's important that people like me. And I know that sounds weird, but that's just a realization that I've had. And so when people don't like me, which is part of the turf of being very outspoken on the internet, because there are always going to be haters and people that are jealous and people whatever. And so I've had my fair share over the years. Specifically now, without getting too much into it, but I'm dealing right now with a crisis. I don't know if you want to call it that, but being targeted very badly online, and it's really rough for me. And so, when I have failures that anger people, even if it's even if it's not justified, if it is justified, it doesn't matter. What if I did something to make someone not like me? I have a problem, and I'm dealing with it right now. I don't know how to cope with it. I don't know how to build that thick skin and just brush it off of me. It gets to me and it weighs on me. And sometimes I feel like it's all not worth it. I'll just go be like a janitor or something, or I'll work at some company and not have to worry about this quote unquote, sorry for using this word, this celebrity thing where I'm, being hated upon all the time. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I posted a picture of a panel of judges that I was on at an ultra-Orthodox institution that have separate events for men and women. And so at the men events, the panel is all male judges. At the women events, it's female judges. So I posted a picture of this panel, and I got absolutely massacred on LinkedIn by hundreds of very militant feminists who were saying to me, it's 2022. Why are there no women on the panel? I said, stop, you're barking up the wrong tree. Like, you're right. But this institution specifically trains 20% of the country's female engineers. This is not a chauvinist, sexist institution. I am all for promoting women. You're attacking someone for this is not it. But, and it shouldn't bother me by now. I should be used to it, but I'm not, unfortunately. So it is a challenge of mine. That's the answer to your question is, with my failures, I have a hard time dealing with it. I'm learning.
You're amazing. Everything you've said, it's like, you just keep one-upping what I thought you might even say. And like, you're so humble and you have so much humility. Like, your parents did so many good things, and they're continuing, obviously, because kids are not, as you know, you have growing children, like it never ends. And I'm just so impressed with you. Thank you for your courage, and thank you for living on your brother's legacy and your parents' legacy, because I'm sure you were always great. And now that physically your brother is gone, I can see so much of his passion and what he lived through for in you. So if you already didn't have it to like the nth degree, I'm sure he's like so beyond proud of the things you're doing. And just to quickly circle back to the first thing you said, which again was so courageous to share that you did stuff with him. I think it's fair to say that it's more about, forgiving both of you, yourself and him, for not making that time and doing the last thing you said, which was like, don't have a bucket list. If you've got something to share with somebody and they're really important to you, don't let a night go by, especially if you're upset, right? Is that fair to say that you would? How would you speak to that?
It's an interesting question. Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's the same concept, like I said, about the bucket list. I'm not the whole, like, this might be your last day on earth. Yes, that's true. But it's not even from that perspective. It's, if you want to do something, you're basically like punishing yourself, and you're depriving yourself of something that you want to do and that you can do. My wife wanted to jump out of a plane. I can't relate. I don't know why, but she wanted to. So she did it. I wanted to meet the founder of Apple, Steve Wozniak. It was a dream of mine. So I did it. I wanted to, I don't know, I wanted to work with Google. Things that I wanted to do. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that if you have a dream to be the president of the United States, that you're, going to necessarily be the president of the United States. But I will say that, the famous expression, aim for the stars, land on the moon, aim for the moon, land on the stars, whatever it is. People say to me all the time, I'm looking for a job. And I'm like, okay, what do you want to do? They're like, well, I've done this. I can do this. I'm like, stop. I don't care what you've done. I don't care I want to know what you want to do. If you wake up tomorrow morning and you are living your dream, what does that look like? And they say, wow, I never thought about that. And I say to them, it's important to think about it that way, because if your goal is here and you start here, you might end up here. But if you start at what I've done or what I can do, you're starting at the bottom. You have to work your way all the way up. Start at the top. So that's, just my philosophy on life. Aim high, go big or go home. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like Gay Hendricks, like zone of genius versus zone of X. Like, I can do this really well and I'll probably make a living at it, but what do you really want to do?
I met a woman a couple of weeks ago, very impressive woman. She connected with me on LinkedIn. She's in marketing. And we're sitting there, we're talking marketing. And I said, I don't even remember why. I guess she was looking for her next, I don't know. And I said to her, so like, what's your dream? And I expect her to say to be like CMO of Google, and she's like, oh, I want to be a marathon runner and an athlete. I'm like, what are you doing in marketing? What's wrong with you? And she's like, nah, I'm too old. I'm like, are you kidding me? You're not even 30 years old. She's like, nah. I'm like, okay, stop. And I literally in the meeting wrote a WhatsApp to BD Deutsch, who's the religious runner who almost made it into the Olympics. I don't know if you know her. She's unbelievable. Look her up, BD Deutsch. She's a religious woman, mother of I don't even know how many kids, and she was almost in the Olympics.
I did see that.
So
yeah.
I literally WhatsApp BD. I'm like, BD, I'm sitting with this woman right now who dreams of being you, basically. I want you to speak to her. And she's like, fine, for sure. So they so I said to this woman, like, you want to be a marathon? Why would you not do that? Like, so that's just, I guess, just the way I operate. If I want to do something, I'm going to do it, or I'm going to try to do it at least.
Well, may that fire that you have always carry you through the difficult times, because to me, that's living. So if you're ever struggling with depression or feeling down to the ground, listen back to what you just said on this podcast, because that, to me, that's the most inspiring thing someone could say. Like, seize life, hope it's high.
I want to leave you with one more important thing that I heard recently.
Great.
That resonated with me so strongly. And he said like this, it was a video online. I think it was on TikTok. I said, what if I told you that every type of anxiety has one source, one single source for all anxiety. The source of all anxiety is the thought that something is going to happen and I will not be okay. Whether it's money, whether it's health, whether it's losing a loved, something's going to happen and I will not be okay. And that is where anxiety comes from. But wait a second, let's dissect this. You're 43 years old. Things have happened to you and you're okay. You're here. So what evidence do you have to the fact that one day something will happen and you won't be okay? Things will happen and you will be okay, just like you've been okay till today. Yes, you'll deal with challenges, but there is no data. There is no evidence to back up the claim that one day something will happen and I will not be okay. You will be okay because you've been okay. And so that thought for me has really comforted me in times of anxiety. It will be okay. That's it. Just the last 3 words or 4 words that someone told me, and it's so simplistic and it's so obvious, but it's so profound. This too shall pass. That's it. Good, this too shall pass. Bad, this too shall pass. Prepare yourself. It will pass, for better or for worse, and you'll move on. And my biggest fear is my career ending. It's going to happen eventually. This too shall pass. And then I'll reinvent myself, just like I did till now. Things don't stay forever. This is the way the world works. This too shall pass. That's my biggest lesson for your listeners.
Thank you. And you know what? I thought you were going to say fear is the false evidence that appears real. That's what I thought the 4 words were going to say.
Interesting.
Hillel, thank you so much. What a joy and an honor to get to spend a few moments with you sitting and learning. And I'm so beyond grateful. I think that this is going to cheer up a lot of hearts. Next time I'm in Israel, I definitely want to hang out with you. And I want to just give you a blessing, you and your whole family, that, the loss that we all suffered as a world, but we should learn from the fire that is in your family. And we should just keep growing from strength to strength and really just keep reaching for the moon.
Amen. And you can mark yourself down as the only podcast interview I've ever done that I made the person cry. Good.
What? Oh, you got to do more podcasts.
It was great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And definitely looking forward to grabbing lunch when you're here in Israel.
Yeah, me too. All right.